Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection, the senator from Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that Jesse Betcher be granted floor privileges. He is currently my military fellow.
Without objection.
Mr. President, as Jesse Betcher is coming to the floor, and before I speak, I want to say that he has served in the Army Special Operations Command for the past 16 years. Jesse, a Special Forces Sergeant Major, has deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan numerous times over the past decade, and he has added tremendously to our office's military and overall productivity. Mr. President, I'd like to take a few minutes to acknowledge the steady efforts of our armed forces and our intelligence community to eliminate the leader of al-Qaeda and to help bring some peace and relief to our nation and to those who lost loved ones in the tragedy on 9/11. You know, I've heard some people say justice has been done because the leader of this terrorist organization has finally been captured and taken and killed. You know, Mr. President, I'm not one who's going to say justice has been done. I don't consider taking out the leader of a terrorist organization who killed thousands of Americans who just went to work one day to do their jobs for adding to their quality of life and the lives of their families, an even trade. I don't consider that it is enough. However, it is a first step to righting the wrong that was done by not only the leader of al-Qaeda, but all of those that he has trained through the years to give up their own lives in order to kill innocent people. Because he has ruined the lives of so many Americans, and he has also ruined the lives of so many young Muslim followers who have given up a productive life for one of terrorism and murder. I want to thank today President George W. Bush for his relentless efforts to put this accomplishment in motion. He is the president who received the shock on 9/11, who had to deal with the immediate aftermath. And he put in place the organizations, the military control, the intelligence gathering that have brought us to this point today. And I want to commend President Obama for carrying these principles through to completion. As things are unfolding more and more, we know that President Obama made a very tough and very decisive and correct decision, but a very tough one at the time. And I think both President Bush and President Obama deserve praise today. I want to also especially say that I am proud of the Navy SEALs who knowingly went into harm's way to take down Osama bin Laden. Those are the troops that probably thought there was a good chance they might not come home ever. But they are among the most highly trained forces in the world. They operate on sea, on air, and on land. Each and every day, they volunteer for some of the most dangerous missions under the most difficult circumstances and without recognition. Normally, it is something that we never hear about that takes us one step closer to wiping out the terrorism that we know in the world today. They are truly our nation's heroes. While much praise deservedly goes to the 24 Navy SEALs who raided the terrorist stronghold using surprise and lethal speed, we cannot even think that they went there alone, because they didn't. Shortly after the world saw the brutality of Osama bin Laden's savage plan unfold on American soil nearly 10 years ago, President Bush took the decisive steps to launch an aggressive campaign to hunt down those responsible, including Osama bin Laden. One such step occurred on October 26, 2001, when President Bush signed into law the Patriot Act. It provided the law enforcement and the intelligence community greater authority to track and intercept communications among suspected terrorists. This law has proven to be immeasurably valuable to the intelligence community. It has enhanced our ability to find and capture terrorists. I hope that we will be able to reach a bipartisan agreement to extend the provisions of the Patriot Act that are set to expire at the end of this month. As we have seen from various media reports, and I look forward to getting more details, the ability to monitor communications was a crucial lead used by analysts to determine the eventual location of Osama bin Laden. As my colleagues are aware, the provisions that are set to expire include the authorization for the FBI to use roving wiretaps on surveillance targets, because at the time that we took up the Patriot Act, we were still having to get permission from authorities to wiretap a telephone number, not keeping up with the technology advances that allow you to have a cell phone and never have a landline and throw away a cell phone every 15 minutes if you think that you are in danger of being surveyed. So, of course, we had to lock it into the target, not to the phone number. That's part of what the Patriot Act does. It also has a lone wolf provision that allows for the investigation of individuals who are acting alone but who have been radicalized and are sympathetic to terrorist organizations and pose a significant national security threat. These are just two of the provisions that have enhanced our capabilities to obtain information that has been crucial in capturing not only terrorists that we know have already plotted against us, but also to uncover their plots before they are able to do the harm. We must not allow the provisions of the Patriot Act to expire, especially at a time when al-Qaeda is reeling from the death of their leader and could be plotting revenge. Stepping back our intelligence efforts now could allow al-Qaeda to regroup and launch additional attacks against our nation. Another very important step was taken in signing the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act in December of 2004. This act created the National Counterterrorism Center. This center is the primary organization in the United States government for integrating, analyzing, and sharing all intelligence from the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Defense, and others that pertain to counterterrorism. This was a very important tool for assimilating the various information that were being gathered by many of the intelligence organizations and putting it through one grid, one analysis, and it was that painstaking analysis through the last 10 years that allowed actionable intelligence to be the instigator of the effort to take out Osama bin Laden. Within our military, we have a small group of Tier 1 units that are specially selected and highly trained for this exact type of counterterrorist mission. They have gained fame in the last few decades through books and movies. These heroes are real. I would like to point out that the commander of these elite warriors, Vice Admiral William McCraven, is a proud Texan from San Antonio who is also an alumni of the University of Texas. Admiral McCraven is a highly decorated Navy SEAL who lives by the SEAL Code and earns his trident every day. Vice Admiral McCraven has been nominated by the President to receive his 4th star and, if confirmed, will lead U.S. Special Ops Command. I can think of no one better qualified to lead our special operations than he is, and I look forward to supporting his confirmation on the Senate floor. While these highly skilled commandos deserve every accolade that is bestowed upon them, we can't forget those who guided them to the target, the direct and indirect support personnel, the technicians, the analysts, the pilots and crews, and all of those who have worked meticulously and attentively for years to finally put together the pieces to get the seals to the right place at the right time. We have seen many changes in the past 10 years. Departments and agencies have been consolidated or created. Military commanders have retired. Administrations have changed hands. Most of the soldiers who conducted that first raid in Afghanistan in October of 2001 are no longer wearing uniform. Most of those in the military today were still in school in September of 2001. Many of those in the military signed up to go into the military after 9/11 because they felt so much of a loyalty to our country. I'd like to acknowledge those who devoted so many years to pursuing Osama bin Laden. To those who have retired or moved on to other professions, I want you to know that we appreciate you and your work was not in vain. Our leaders said from the beginning, after September 11th, on that fateful day, we would get Osama bin Laden. And through the efforts of thousands, we did. We have the most professional, the best trained, the best equipped intelligence and military agencies in the world. While there are sighs of relief now from the public, our work is clearly not done. Al-Qaeda is still plotting against our freedom. Other groups are just as zealously dedicated to the mission of destroying our way of life. So while taking down the head of Al-Qaeda was a victory, of course, it is also a stark reminder that we must remain vigilant. As we speak right now, our intelligence experts are exploiting, analyzing, disseminating the information gleaned from the bin Laden raid, and our special operators are preparing for the next mission, whatever it may be. Mr. President, I believe our country is united in the commitment to protecting what makes America great, our freedom and our way of life. I look forward to a day when we will not have to walk through a body scan or put our shoes on an X-ray machine to get on an airplane. I look forward to a day when we will not have to fight against an enemy that is living among us, an enemy that is plotting against us in our own country, an enemy that is willing to kill itself in order to kill innocent people and destroy our way of life. I look forward to a day when we never see a body bag at Dover, Delaware, one of our military elite coming home having made the ultimate sacrifice. That day will only come if we as a nation remain willing to fight and even die to protect the ideals of America, the foundation that was laid by our founding fathers and has been protected by every generation since that time. Today is a day that we reflect on those principles. It is a day that we renew our commitment to uphold them at all costs. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, I'd ask consent that I be allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection, the Senator is recognized.
Mr. President, the country faces two large economic challenges. The first is growing our economy, creating jobs, getting the economy back on track. Second major challenge is cutting the deficit. I'd like to talk about both of those very briefly. I have four charts here, one that relates to jobs and growing the economy, and three that deal more specifically with the deficit. Unfortunately, here in Washington, the debate has shifted almost entirely to a discussion of the deficit. Too many people in Washington are pretending that our efforts to generate growth in the economy have been accomplished, that it's a done deal, that we have recovered from the recession. We can now focus full-time on how to cut the deficit. The facts are that this is simply not true. Professor Alan Blinder, an economist at Princeton, former deputy chair of the Federal Reserve, testified before the Senate Finance Committee a couple of weeks ago, and he made the following statement. He said, "The economic recovery is mediocre at best, and unemployment remains high. To me, these conditions describe a bad time to put the economy on a diet of either spending cuts or tax increases," end quote. Let me point to the first of these charts to underscore the point that Professor Blinder made. The recession that we have just gone through created a very deep hole. And if you look at the number of private sector jobs that were lost between November of 2007 and the end of, essentially March of 2010, you can see that it is February of 2010, it is 8.8 million jobs that were lost as a result of the recession. While things are getting better, it's clear that they have not gotten enough better. We have now created 1.8 million new jobs since we began adding private sector jobs. So we still have a shortfall of about 7 million jobs that need to be created in order to get back to where we were in November of 2007. And, of course, there have been a lot of new people come into the job market since then. So we really need to create more jobs than that. We are encountering some strong headwinds in our effort to dig out of this recession. The strongest headwind, of course, is the high price of oil and gas, which is a tax on consumers. It is a tax on our businesses, and it comes at a very bad time. And we all are looking for ways to try to deal with that, but frankly, it is a difficult thing to legislate a solution to. Another headwind is one of our own creation, and that is the constant drumbeat that we hear to cut spending at all levels of government. Cut it here in Washington, cut it at the state level, cut it at the local level. My own strong view is that we should heed Professor Blinder's advice. We need to continue to work to keep investing in those things that will help us create good-paying jobs. Timing is important. We clearly need to reduce the deficit, but we should adopt policies this year that will put us on a long-term path to reduce the deficit, but I hope these policies will delay major cuts in spending and major increases in taxes until we can come out of this recession some additional distance. Now let me talk about the deficit, the second of the challenges that I talked about before. We have a chart here called Federal Revenues and Outlays as a Percentage of Gross Domestic Product. This is for a 40-year period from 1970 to 2010, and it's a chart that the Congressional Budget Office prepared and has presented to us. Clearly, there's some important points you can take away from this chart. Number one, on average, over the last 40 years, that's since 1970, the federal government has accounted for 20.7% of gross domestic product. The spending by the federal government, on average, has accounted for that. Over that same period, on average, we have raised 18.1% of gross domestic product in the form of revenues. So, on average, we have been running a deficit of about 3% each year, 3% of gross domestic product each year during this 40-year period. Today, that 3% of gross domestic product is about $450 billion. The one time during this 40 years when we achieved a balanced budget and even ran a surplus for a 4-year period was at the end of the 1990s and in the year 2000. How do we manage to do that? Well, beginning in 1990, the Congress passed and President George H.W. Bush signed a bill that both restrained spending and raised taxes. Again in 1993 and again in 1997, Congress passed, and in that case President Clinton signed, budget plans that did even more to do what had been done in 1990. That is, both of those plans restrained spending and raised revenues. We enjoyed a strong economy during those years in question, and that, of course, helped to bring more revenue into the government and helped to get us to a balanced budget and a surplus. So what went wrong that caused us to once again fall into deficit? I'd cite three factors that caused it. First, the tax cuts that Congress enacted in the last decade. Beginning in 2001, then again in 2003, Congress passed what have come to be known as the Bush tax cuts. These fairly drastically reduced the revenue coming to the federal government. At the same time that we were cutting taxes, we ramped up federal spending, primarily for defense, and that's a result of the Afghan war and the Iraq war. Estimate there is something like $1.3 trillion has gone into those efforts. And in addition to defense, we ramped up spending on health care, primarily by including a prescription drug benefit in Medicare. Now, all of that increased spending occurred without any increase in revenues to pay for it. I repeat, none of this spending was offset with increased revenues. And the third factor, of course, that has brought us into the very serious deficit that we now face is the slowdown of economic activity. This contributed substantially to increased expenses for the government in some of the entitlement programs, Medicaid and food stamps and a variety of them, but also the decreased revenues. And when people are earning less money, they pay less in taxes and less revenue comes to the government to pay for those services that the government is providing. The deficit, of course, has worsened substantially in the last 2 years because of, first, the reduced federal taxes that were being collected, largely a result of the recession, and second, increased federal spending, both because there's more demand for government services as a result of the recession, and also because we passed the Recovery Act to stimulate the economy. And I think most economists would conclude that it has helped to stimulate the economy. The Pew Fiscal Analysis Initiative analyzed the policies and legislation that have caused the surpluses of the late 1990s to become the deficits that we see today. And they produced a list showing their conclusions. Now, this is right here on this chart, and you can see these are in the order of importance, the order in which they contributed to the current deficit situation. The top two drivers in this list are the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts. They account for about 13% of what we face today in deficits, and the Iraq-Afghanistan wars, which account for about 10% of what we face. All told, tax cuts caused 21% of deficits since 2001. Defense spending caused 15% of deficits. This is increased defense spending. Two-thirds of that was due to Iraq and Afghanistan. Increased non-defense spending caused 10% of the deficits we currently face. The Recovery Act itself caused 6%. Medicare prescription drug benefit caused 2%. The next and final chart that I have here shows how these policies have affected the deficit over time. The changes caused, this is a chart which is labeled Why CBO's Debt Projections Changed Between 2001 and 2011. The specific policies and drivers that, I know this is very difficult for anyone to see on a television, but let me just make the main point. The main points are that the changes caused by the legislation make up the large segments at the top of the chart, including interest charges, They caused 65% of the deficits when you look at these policy changes. The remaining 35% of deficits are due mainly to the economic and the technical adjustments to CBO's projections, primarily to reflect the lower revenue that we have enjoyed because of the recessions. Now, how do we dig out of the hole we're in? I'd say some simple, obvious things. Number one, we need to keep the focus on growing the economy. As Professor Blinder said, do not put the economy on a diet. This is not the right time to do that. Second, we need to agree, as we did in 1990 and 93 and 97, to a balanced package of spending cuts and tax increases that will once again put us on a path to a balanced budget. We have some serious proposals to work from in achieving this new deficit reduction plan. Of course, the President's Deficit Reduction Commission, the Simpson-Bowles Commission, Senator Domenici and Alice Rivlin, the former head of the Congressional Budget Office, put out a bipartisan commission report, which is very constructive. The President himself has given the framework for a plan. There's a bipartisan group of senators, a gang of 6, that are working to come up with a proposal. And, of course, Senator Conrad, who chairs the Budget Committee, is putting together a proposed budget plan for that committee's consideration. All of these items all of these plans that I mentioned follow the model used in the 1990s of combining both spending cuts and revenue increases. The only proposal that does not follow this model of a balanced package of spending cuts and tax increases is the budget that was passed by the House Republicans 2 weeks ago. Rather than raising revenue while cutting spending, it would cut revenue while cutting spending. In my view, this cannot lead us to a lower deficit. There's a lot of political polarization here in Washington. I remain hopeful that we can get a critical mass of right-thinking people to do the responsible thing, to come together on a balanced package of spending cuts and revenue increases that we can commit to going forward. We should be able to agree on policies that grow the economy and shrink the long-term deficit. I pledge my best efforts to achieve these objectives. I urge my colleagues to work to do so as well. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest you have some quorum.
The clerk will call the roll of the Senate.
Mr. Akaka.
privileges of the floor through the balance of the day.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the quorum call, the absence of a quorum be noted.
And the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. The senator from Minnesota.